So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to those of you that are here in person with us at this year's Visser lecture, and welcome to those of you that are joining us online. It's the first time that we're doing it in this hybrid mode. A very special welcome to our guest speaker, Professor Acknowledgements. Thank you for your patience with us. We've rescheduled this a few times in the hope of actually being able to do it in person, and I'm glad that we've finally succeeded. I know you're only here for a few more weeks, so thank you for making yourself available. Then a special welcome to Mr. Peter Lowe, who's here representing Remgrow Limited, the sponsors of this event. Thank you so much for being here, and also a warm welcome to our colleagues from Remgrow that are joining online. Warm welcome to our Vice-Chancellor and Rector, Professor Wim de Villiers, to our Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Social Impact Transformation and Personnel, Professor Quipman, our Chief Operating Officer, Stan du Plessis, and to the other members of the Rectorate that are joining us online. This lecture series really is a highlight in the academic calendar of the EMS faculty. It's an opportunity that we have every second year to bring a truly renowned guest speaker to Stellenbosch University in order that that speaker can really challenge us to think about the pressing issues of the day, to stimulate thinking, and to push us closer to the research frontier. So we're very grateful for the sponsorship from Remgrow Limited that makes this lecture series possible. The lecture series was established to commemorate, to honour the memory of Mr. Visser, who tragically passed away in 2012. After graduating from Stellenbosch University in 1977 with a BCom honours, Mr. Visser qualified as a chartered accountant before joining the Rembrandt Group, where he remained until his untimely death in 2012. In his 32 years at the Rembrandt Group, later to become Remgrow Limited, he left an indelible mark on the company, its investments, the employees of the group, and the South African business landscape at large. He was a very dedicated alumnus of Stellenbosch University and served as the chairperson of the Stellenbosch University Stellenbosch Trust. In that capacity, he played a truly pivotal role in the governance of university funds. Under his leadership, significant trust resources were allocated to building capacity in the university, promoting the university's interests internationally, and he also made concerted efforts towards fundraising internationally. We're very proud to honour him with this lecture series that bears his name, and grateful to Remgrow for their ongoing commitment to this event. Mrs. Visser is joining us online. Ordinarily, she would have been with us. We're very grateful that she also continues to be so involved in this particular event. So thank you, everybody, both those of you here in person and those of you attending online. I'm going to hand over to Professor Johan Fourie to introduce our speaker. Thank you, Johan.
Good afternoon, everyone, those in person and those online. I recently experienced firsthand the uses and abuses of history. History in the right hands can be enlightening. Only 2 weeks ago, I was here in the same venue, just across the room, listening to Acknowledgements' STIA's lecture on Africa's post-colonial economic development successes and failures. Professor Acknowledgements spoke about the need to revisit the complexities of the past, that what we might regard as the frustrating failures of Africa's first generation of independence leaders should not be dismissed so easily. There were many successes too. It was a provocative and stimulating lecture and forced me to rethink my own views on this period. When I later delved into some World Bank statistics on African growth, testing some of the assertions he had made in his talk, I realized that I had indeed been wrong and he had been correct. When the facts change, I change my mind, is what Keynes would have said. But sometimes we also get the facts wrong. A week after Professor Acknowledgements' lecture, I faced a formidable foe when debating my new book on global economic history. I faced accusations that were false, claims were made that were unsubstantiated, and this was not the case of an academic study of history, where we would test new and possibly even provocative hypotheses against the evidence, but instead activist history, a history in service of an ideology. That we use rather than abuse history matters. When COVID-19 struck, historians of distant plagues and panics were pulled from the academic ivory towers and put on the spotlight. tell us what we can expect, they were asked. As Barry Eichengreen, the financial historian, explained so eloquently after the global financial crisis, when disasters strike, we resort to analogical reasoning. That is, telling history through stories, rather than using our theory or empirics to come to answers. And those stories are often told by historians. What they say, therefore, matter in a crisis. We are therefore incredibly fortunate today to welcome one of the world's leading historians of Africa to Stellenbosch. Professor Emmanuel Achampong is Oppenheimer Faculty Director of the Harvard University Center for African Studies and Ellen Gurney Professor of History and of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. He is the author of several books, including Drink, Power and Cultural Change, A Social History of Alcohol in Ghana, 1800 to the Present. And between 2006 and 2010, Professor Achampong served as the editor of the Journal of African History, one of the most prestigious academic journals in the world in the field of history. He has a vast list of publications on diverse topics, and what I did last week, or 2 weeks ago when I introduced him, I simply mentioned his top 5 papers, most recently published papers, to give you a sense of that diversity. So the first is a paper on illicit distillation, a paper on popular music, a paper on cattle disease, a paper on religious pluralism, and a paper on Chinese investment in Africa. Professor Achampong is also busy with a project on the history of the ANC and the history of Africa's post-colonial economic development. Professor Achampong has already strong links with Stellenbosch. He was the second invited speaker of the annual LEAP lecture series in 2016. He again participated in 2020 when the event moved online. He also serves as an advisor to one of our PhD students, Nobunkwele Mbem, a PhD student in the biography of an uncharted people project, and he sits on the advisory board of the Cape of Good Hope panel project. He is, of course, also a fellow here at STIAS. And so it is wonderful to welcome him here today for the Thijs Visser Memorial Lecture on Pandemics, Commodity Markets and Recessions, Africa and the Coronavirus. In this deep crisis that has afflicted us, we are honored to have a historian of Professor Achampong's repute to provide direction. Historians look back so that we can look forward. How can the continent position itself for a recovery after COVID-19? It is my great pleasure to introduce a master of storyteller to enlighten the past and illuminate the future, Professor Emmanuel Achampong.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am told this is just for the recording. And so if my voice goes down, do signal, and then I will raise my voice. Thank you, Johan, for a wonderful introduction. He didn't mention that he's also a good friend, which means he's very partisan about the things he says about me. Let me start off by acknowledgements. Let me start with the Vice-Chancellor and the Rector. I also want to thank the Dean and staff of the Faculty of Economic Management Sciences, the Visser family, and I understand Mrs. Visser is online, Remgro Limited. I would also, I want to thank all of you, my colleagues. I've been hiding out at STIAS, so it's nice to see faces beyond the fellows at STIAS. I want to acknowledge the African Export-Import Bank, especially the Chief Economist, Hippolyte Fofak, who is also the Director of Research, who became intrigued as I began to explore this paper and shared certain graphs with me that I will share with you. Likewise, Professor William Boateng from the Economics Department at the University of Ghana, who read an early draft, also says, oh, you need to see this graph. So I have these graphs that have been shared with me that speak to some of the issues I will raise today. And of course, to Johan, who suggested that I give this lecture. And it's hard for me to say no to Johan, so I said yes. The choice of topic. as Johan points out. I'm a historian with a deep interest in political economy and in economic history. But I'm also a historian or a social historian of disease. So I've written, as he pointed out, about things from cattle diseases through human diseases. So I decided in this lecture to bring my interest in economic history together with my interest in the social history of disease as we look at corona. So very quickly, I will speak to, I did write a paper. Johan knows I always write a paper, but I never read my papers. So I write it, and then I speak to it, but there's a paper I did write just for you. So I will look at the introduction, and I want to speak to why I chose to speak on this particular topic. And then the second section, I'll look at pandemics and economic recessions in historical perspective, because I bring the perspective of history to bear on the present. In the third section, I think it is instructive to look at Ebola in West Africa, which is sort of a preview of some of the challenges we are going through. Because though we've had pandemics in the past, there's a sense in which Ebola is the first real pandemic in post-independent Africa that we see African governments wrestle with this. And then the fourth section, I'll look at Africa before and during COVID, looking at our economies based on commodity exports and the large informal sectors of African economies. And then I'll move to a conclusion in which I look briefly at our growth prospects, and I share 3 historical insights in terms of what I would like to leave with you. COVID-19 should not have taken us by surprise. The frequency of severe acute respiratory syndrome coronaviruses over the last couple of decades, and I give examples, the Hong Kong flu 1997, we had SARS in 2002, 2003, swine flu 2008 through 2010, we had MERS, or the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, 2012, to the point that the scientific community, or the medical scientific community, and the World Health Organization have anticipated that if we are to have a global pandemic, it would most likely be an influenza-type virus. And so there's a sense in which in 2018, WHO put MERS and SARS on the top of its list of priority diseases with epidemic or pandemic potential. And this encouraged prolific research by economists, historians, health scientists, epidemiologists, and it generated an interest in the flu pandemic of 1918, 1919, because people see it as the one that is perhaps closest to modeling what could happen. It also sets the upper limit in terms of mortality, because in that pandemic, 2% of global population, or about 50 million people, died. And it's not possible that we'll get to that point, and I'll explain why. But the world was caught unprepared by COVID-19, because epidemics are not just epidemiological events. They are also political events, and that is what makes them fascinating. Declaring an epidemic is a political event. It's not the doctors who declare it. It's those in government. It's the politicians who declare it. Containing epidemics requires political anticipation. It requires political initiative during the outbreak, and political will and imagination in recovery. So politics, and at the center, the state, is very important when it comes to epidemics. There's been an outburst of literature both before COVID-19 about the flu pandemic and during COVID-19, which even intensified interest in 1918, 1919, on the intersection of pandemics and economics. But the literature has focused, as Johan can confirm, on the United States and Europe. So often we get left out of these important conversations. and they've attempted to model health, economic, and institutional impacts of such a pandemic. There have been a couple of papers on Africa, and I'm happy that my friend and colleague Johan wrote one with Jonathan Jace, looking at the influenza pandemic in South Africa, which they published in January 2021. And another friend who used to be at Oxford but has moved on, James Fensky, and others also wrote a piece looking at influenza and the influenza pandemic in India, which also they published in the middle of last year. So there's been this outburst of publications looking at 1918, 1919, spawned by what we are going through at the moment. Africa has not been very central to this literature, and I think it's because of maybe two main reasons. One is the death of statistics, because they are looking at the early 20th century, and till recently that we've had databases like that of Angus Maddison and the rest. You really couldn't bring Africa pre-1870, even the early 20th century. So that is one. Second, the literature has focused on the very developed, highly industrialized countries. And this is because they have these large sector, service sector components of their economies. I point out that in the West, consumption constitutes or accounts for almost 2/3 of their GDP. So when a pandemic strikes, changes in consumer behavior have major implications for the economy. And I think because of that, and we are largely commodity exporters, they don't see the parallel in including us in some of these studies. Yes, Africa's economies are commodity exporters. And usually when we have a spurt and we are growing, it's because commodity prices are high. And we've gone through recently the Africa Rising story, and when we look at some of the graphs, at around 2012 we were at the peak, and then something happened in 2014. We had a commodity shock, and things went down. And just when we were thinking about getting up on our feet again, we have COVID. But Africa also has these large informal sectors, hospitality sectors, which are highly contact sensitive, employing millions more than the formal sector. So I think that we need to apply these insights to us because they are relevant. Indeed, my colleague, and I'll speak to that later, Danny Roderick, has been musing whether Africa might be pioneering a new model of economic development. We seem to have gone from agriculture, we dodged manufacture, we went straight into manufacturing. The economists will say you cannot develop without manufacturing. But we're getting to the point that we're also beginning to wonder whether something novel is happening. So I'm drawing on these insights from studies that have looked primarily at Europe and the United States to say, let's see what they mean in terms of our African economies and what we can learn from them. Since World War II, or post-1946, we've seen a proliferation of influenza-type events. And the striking thing is that they seem to coincide with economic recessions. So there was the Asian flu, 1957-58. There was the Hong Kong flu, 1968-1970. Swine flu, 2009-2010, each associated with an economic recession. The second important development is the progress we have made in terms of modern vaccination. So now, when there is an epidemic or there's a pandemic, we see a lower morbidity and mortality in terms of the impact on human lives. What we see rather is more impact in terms of economics. So less people die, but we see economic recessions during these epidemics and pandemics. I pointed out that during the influenza pandemic, 50 million people died. And depending on where you are, the incidence differed. So in non-Western countries and in the colonies, more people died. So 2% average. In Africa, it was about 3.5%. In Asia, it was about 3%. Johan's work is showing that in South Africa, it went up as high as 6% in terms of mortality. Up to date, although COVID has affected about 167 million people, we've seen just about 3.5 million deaths. So now when there's a pandemic, we don't see it in mortality. We see it especially in its economic impact. And this is what has made these historical insights fascinating for me. And now historians have gone all the way back to the Black Death in the 14th century, looking at the difference it made to European economies. So this is 1340s, 1350s. Bubonic plague comes. By the time it's over, it had changed the economic landscape of Europe. It had positioned England and Holland to be the new leaders. Spain and Italy had declined. And what I find fascinating about this was how pandemic became almost like a launch pad for new growth, but importantly for the kind of state that was at the center, because that is what explained the difference between England and Holland and between Italy and Spain. The Spanish flu of 1918, 1919 is the closest parallel we have to COVID, because we kind of did the same things. People did what you're doing now. They put on masks. They closed down schools, in many types of schools. They banned public gatherings in pubs, which is a very important place. And I've been here long enough to hear South Africans complain about the restaurants and the bars being closed. They closed down movie theaters. They closed down places like that. Those who were ill were forced to quarantine. Entire families were. And so in terms of trying to imagine COVID-19 and its 1918, 1919 is the closest parallel. Pandemics affect economies in three ways. Human capital losses, so we've talked about loss of life and other things. Voluntary changes in human behavior to avoid infection. So even the Uber drivers, when I arrived, were complaining that nobody's taking Uber, everybody's staying home, and everybody's suffering. The restaurants were complaining. So modifications to human behavior during pandemic. And the third are state-decreed measures or interventions. We all panic when we think there's going to be another lockdown. And this is one pandemic where governments around the world have voluntarily shut down their economies. We've never seen anything like this in the world. We are in novel territory. Economic impact is measured in terms of a decline in GDP or in industrial productivity. For Africa, we will measure it perhaps outside of South Africa in decline in agricultural productivity. The overlap of the 1918 flu, as I read the literature, together with war, so there's World War I, and a series of bad years, makes it sometimes challenging or difficult to distinguish what is exactly the impact of flu, as distinct from war, as distinct from a series of bad economic years. But in Europe, even non-combatant countries declined in terms of GDP, average of about 7% in 1918. The UK, the following year, continued to decline. In fact, the UK growth would not resume until about 1922. It is interesting that when I looked at the US and I looked at the literature, it looked like the 1918 flu had sort of not much impact in terms of industrial production, but it seems to have had a large negative impact on stock prices. Into even the following year, stock prices had not recovered. So with COVID-19, as I've said, we are in novel territory. Governments around the world voluntarily locked down, and in a sense, it has impacted world economy in very new ways. So let me turn to Ebola in West Africa, so that we have a very African example of independent African governments wrestling with a pandemic, or in this case, an epidemic, because it wasn't global, so it did not assume pandemic dimensions. But within West Africa, this was something that was very severe. So the Ebola was not new. I think Ebola was first discovered around 1976. But this was the first time Ebola had shown up, and shown up on this scale in West Africa, affecting 3 neighboring countries, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And I know you all know where these countries are, but as a historian, I need to put in a map, so you get your map. So these areas, what I think shook people up in terms of Ebola, which actually began around April 2014. It is intriguing that WHO did not declare an international emergency until August. But in July 25th, if you remember, someone traveled from this Ebola region and went to Lagos. Then everybody panicked because the thing had jumped countries and went to Lagos. So the rest of the world did what they have done now. When South Africa discovered a novel variant of COVID, they shut down their airports and planes. Neighboring countries locked their borders. And what it did would be to intensify the impact of Ebola on the affected countries, because in a sense they had become isolated. These 3 countries are also 3 of the poorest countries in the world. They had just come out of civil war, if you recall. So Liberia, there had been a civil war from 1989 through about 2003. And then Sierra Leone had descended into a civil war from about 1991, only came out of that around 2002. Guinea, you had one person be head of state from 1958 on independence till he died in 1984. That is Sekou Touré. And after that, Guinea just became politically unstable. So in all 3 countries, in a sense, they are coming out of civil war. There's a deep distrust of government institutions. They have very weak healthcare infrastructure. Indeed, all 3 countries are dependent on the aid industry for the provision of even basic healthcare. I remember I went to Sierra Leone just a year after the civil war, so in 2003. For the entire country, there was only one psychiatrist, Ibrahim Nahim. For all of Liberia, with 4.3 million people, there were only 50 medical doctors when Ebola began. So it gives you a sense of where they were. So I also put in a table just for you to see. If you look at the number of people who died between 2014 and 2016, it's less than 30,000 were infected. Only about 11,310 died. But something also came out of this epidemic that I will be speaking to, because I think sometimes we are too dismissive of the loss of life and the value of lives when things happen in Africa. So one of the papers I read for Ebola did something. It costed the value of a statistical life. And I like that, and I'll come back to that. And I think that we should begin to do that when things happen to us. We shouldn't just look at infrastructure and look at the impact on the economy. We should look at the impact on lives and cost that as well. So, as I look at the literature, the piece I referred to is by Catherine Huber and collaborators on the economic and social burden of the 2014 Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And I was embarrassed to, as I read the footnotes, to see that actually the work that had been done on costing the value of statistical life had been done at Harvard by my colleagues in health economics and in the law school. And I scratched my head and said, shame on me. I should have known that and gone over to talk to them. But based on that, and work had been done because someone had looked at road accidents or traffic accidents in Sierra Leone and valued the statistical life of a Sierra Leonean at $577,000. And I liked that. I'm like, okay, that is valued. So based on just lives lost, for the three countries, it is accounted that about $36.6 billion was lost. And I think this gives it perspective, because you go and look at the economics, they'll talk about a loss of $14 billion. But once you add the lives, then it takes it to new levels. So in all, they argue that for the immediate social and economic cost, Ebola cost the three countries $53.19 billion. Once we take out the cost or the value of lives, then we are looking in terms of economics at three ways of considering the impact of the pandemic on the economy. The direct cost of controlling the outbreak, one, the impact on economic output, and third, the impact on future economic growth. So let me now do what we usually do. We will go to World Bank, we'll go to FAO, so they'll give us these statistics, but these statistics are not holistic. They just show sectional impacts on the economy. So the economic cost of the outbreak is $14 billion, and the cost of prevention and treatment outside of West Africa. So there were a few, the US had a few, Spain and Italy, and the UK had like one case each. So the cost of controlling and treating outside of West Africa, $2 billion. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, in 2016, they calculated that the volume of agricultural production in the three countries declined by 12%. The World Bank estimated in 2016 that the outbreak had cost these three countries $2.8 billion. UNDP, looking at all of West Africa, because the pandemic did not only affect just the three countries, it affected the whole West African region. You go to places in the US, people don't even know the difference. If you are in Nairobi, they'll tell you, we hear you have Nairobi, that you have Ebola, and Nairobi has no connection to do with West Africa. So all of West Africa was affected, and according to UNDP, per capita in West Africa declined by about $18 a year between 2014 and 2017. And just in 2017, there was a GDP loss of about $4.7 billion. So this is just going by the economics. But I like Huber because they cost the value of a statistical life, and it tells you what the impact has been. I talk about how after the discovery in Lagos, everybody shut down. So the impact on the three countries were intensified by isolation. Just like now, they couldn't get PPE because their borders were closed. They couldn't access medical experts to come and help them till a number of Western countries decided to intervene. All three countries also share a common economic profile. So mining is important, and in all three countries there's iron, so iron ore, some gold, some diamonds. Sierra Leone and Liberia made us familiar with blood diamonds during their civil war. But much of the mining, except small artisanal mining in diamonds, are controlled by expatriates. So in Liberia, the two largest mining companies are ArcelorMittal and China Union. Most of the citizens, in terms of employment, the largest employing sector is agriculture. And then they have, as usual, these large service sectors or informal sectors that we're seeing all across Africa. And it is these large informal sectors and the importance of labor to agriculture that makes a pandemic or an epidemic have huge economic impacts. So the fear of infection. In Liberia, they draw on traditional labor systems. It's almost as if it's communal labor that comes together for major agricultural tasks, like the clearing of the land, the harvesting, etc., etc. Everybody was afraid of everybody when it came to Ebola. So everybody stayed home. There was a decline in rice production in counties that specialized in rice production, like Lofa County. Rice production declined by about 20% because labor declined. Nobody wanted to come out. So Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea saw an average decline in growth of about 9% caused by a lower labor supply. Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone had just begun to experience positive growth. As I pointed out, they had gone through civil war when Ebola came. Let me I need another pair of eyes. So you can see Guinea. The striking thing is that I was looking at Liberia's thing, and you don't see Liberia here. And I suspect because statistics during the Civil War had become dicey. And I look and just around, you can begin to see things improving. And then 2014 comes. And then here is Sierra Leone. There you see Liberia. Guinea's statistics, I've been reading on Guinea a lot these days. It looks like under Sekou Touré, you really didn't have really concrete statistics. To begin with, when the French left, they either took everything or destroyed everything. So in 1958, Guinea didn't have a baseline in terms of statistical projections. And it didn't get much better under Sekou Touré. So we are now beginning to see some of these patterns in important ways. So let's look at Africa before and during COVID-19 and commodity exports and informality. COVID is simultaneously a health and an economic crisis. We've talked about strong containment measures by governments around the world and the impact this has had, not just on global production, but also on demand. I was looking at some statistics. It looks like in terms of around the major developing countries, China is one of the few countries that still showed positive growth, though it dropped from like 6.1 in 2019 to a little over 1% in 2020. The EU went minus. I believe South Africa also went minus. So we've seen these declines in global growth, which has had an impact on the demand of global commodities, which has had an impact on the prices of commodities as well. A good example is oil. So in 2019, I was doing very well, raising money in Nigeria for the center, and then came COVID in 2020, and then all my oil friends had issues. Oil came all the way down to $20 a barrel, and it's not till about last month that it came up to 63. So I'm hoping that they will be happy to see me when I show up again, and we can resume our conversations. So this had major implications for Africa because we are primarily exporters of commodities. We also have large service sectors, primarily in the informal sector. So many of Africa's workers, they need to go out every day, which is why lockdown was problematic across the continent, unless you have the capacity to feed people and bring them food at where they are and tell them to stay in. I talked about Danny Roderick saying that perhaps we are circumventing manufacturing and maybe we are pioneering a new model of growth. So wholesale and retail services, tourism, hospitality, and food have been adversely hit during COVID-19, primarily because of modifications in behavior. I've talked about a global recession which has reduced growth globally from about 2.9% in 2019. We went minus 3% in 2020. I have been looking at the IMF's reports from last year. They had one in April, which kind of told us to tighten our belt. And they said, okay, economies that are less diversified will suffer. That is us. Those who are resource intensive will suffer. That is us. Those who are primarily dependent on tourism will suffer. So by the time they finished, much of African countries were supposed to anticipate what was coming. Sub-Saharan Africa was supposed to grow at 5.2% in 2020. The IMF will revise that to minus 1.6 and said that, if we do all the right things, we could grow to about 3.1% in 2021. So we are yet to reach mid-year. COVID's impact on the resource-rich countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And as I pointed out, 2012 we were at the height of the Africa Rising story, and then 2014 came the crash. What I found intriguing is that within a year or two, countries like Nigeria and Angola already had gaps in their balance of payments. And I began to ask myself, okay, what did you do with all that money when that came in? And why are you now in distress? Almost like just a year after the decline in prices. Nigeria's economy in 2020 shrunk by 4.3%. Indeed, it's only in the last quarter of 2020 that Nigeria grew by 0.1%, and Nigerians became very excited because there had been negative growth throughout 2020. Angola's economy declined by negative 4%. Just last year, Nigeria's gap or deficit in balance of payments was $14 billion. So it is interesting how things change very quickly once commodity prices go down. South Africa's economy is perhaps the most diversified in Africa. And here, exports, investments, private consumption all play an important role. South Africa's economy was in trouble even before COVID, right? So you were 0.2% in 2019. Then came COVID, and some are saying it went down by as much as negative 8%, but I'll let Johan correct me. And then in Southern Africa, we've had all kinds of issues. There have been cyclones in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, affecting Zambia. And then when you look at the Northeast and East Africa, beginning in late 2019, all these locusts came and from whence affected Kenya and Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia. So a lot was happening before COVID came. And I think it is important to remember that so that we can layer the impact. So the result, as we've seen, especially the IMF pointed out that tourism countries will suffer. So Mauritius and Seychelles, for example, declined between October 2019, October 2020 by about 17% in terms of their growth. Capital outflows. In just February and March of 2020, $5 billion left sub-Saharan Africa. But by about July, I think they had realized that, okay, we'll be fine. A little bit had begun to return, and in the third quarter, about $1.3 billion had returned. We are a continent where remittances are even higher than foreign direct investment. And so last year, foreign direct investment was at historical lows. Remittances contracted by about 20%. So let me, so this is how Africa did during COVID. So we can get a sense, and if you can see, I think when we peaked, this is 2012, that is when even the economists liked us, right? And wrote those nice stories about us. So that's about 2012. Nigeria went into recession in 2016 as a result of the oil decline. So they had just begun to edge out of their recession when COVID came. So you can see that. And I put in a third map, or a third graph, just to see the impact of COVID on the 9 largest economies in Africa. And I'm getting close to my conclusion, so don't worry. So you look, that's South Africa. I know you want to see South Africa. So 2018 is there. 2019, you can barely see anything. And then 2020, there you are. Tunisia's not doing well. There were some countries that surprised me. So Egypt did relatively well between 2018 even through 2020. Kenya rebounded quite quickly by the third quarter of 2020. So it is interesting to see this, to see what the impact has been on the largest economies in Africa. So let's go to concluding thoughts, in which I speak briefly on our world after COVID-19, and then I'll share 3 insights on what, as a historian, looking at this history, I think we should be looking out for. It is assumed that the worst of COVID-19 crisis is over. I don't think we'll be doing those major lockdowns and things anymore. Already by the third quarter of 2020, governments had begun loosening measures because now they were worried about the economic impact of lockdown. We also began to see rising commodity prices, which then makes us very happy in Africa. And then there was the vaccination rollout, which began in Africa from about March. Unfortunately, we are largely dependent on international largesse to get our vaccines. And I was distraught to find out that Malawi had to destroy almost 19,000 vaccines because they didn't have the infrastructure in place to vaccinate people. I'm like, you don't have the money. So they had to ban 19 because they had expired, 19,000 vaccines. The indispensability of external finance to Africa's recovery, consolidation, and growth. Through COVID, I mean, all kinds of measures had to be put in place. The economists can talk about the recent passing of special drawing rights and this and that. So we're still at that stage where we always need help. And in the context of COVID, where the whole world was affected, so the places we usually go for technical, medical, and financial support were themselves overwhelmed by the challenges that they were going through. But one of the things that we've also seen during COVID has been strong social and health interventions by governments. And one of the things the IMF is encouraging governments to do is to continue these pro-business and good governance reforms to put them in good shape in terms of a rebound. We're also beginning to see a return of investor confidence. And late last year, Côte d'Ivoire went on the Euro bond market and raised a $1 billion Euro bond. And then Benin, Republic of Benin, was the first country in Africa to go on the market and complete a bond issuance of €1 billion. So investors are beginning to sort of see that, okay, there's light at the end of the tunnel. So my 3 points. As a historian, it's clear that epidemics and pandemics have become part of our reality. Global warming, environmental deterioration, and usually these things happen when there's zoonosis or species leap. And I can only see them continuing to happen. So African governments have to plan for the reality of that. I mean, we cannot always wait to be overtaken and then scramble to do that. So medical research and vaccine capacity. So I applaud South Africa because of its capacity in medical research. I am hoping you get back to vaccine development because you also used to be good at that. Across the continent, there are just a handful of countries that can develop vaccines. South Africa is one. Egypt is the second. Senegal, which has had a long history because of the Pasteur Institute, also has that capacity. And these countries may have to become the sentinel countries, sort of looking out in terms of medical research and in terms of vaccine development, because we cannot continue to be dependent always on the largesse of the international community. Second is the nature of the state. The state is indispensable in response to epidemics and pandemics, and also if there's supposed to be economic growth or rebound after that. And here I find the lesson of the Black Death in Europe instructive. What made Holland, certain things happened. Okay, populations declined. It led to an interest in capital-intensive and labor-saving devices, which spread from agriculture, went into industry and services. Okay. Everybody could have done that. We see the age where women married went higher, certain things that led to important demographic checks, we see that. But importantly was the state. Because Black Death came, and soon after that, the Atlantic and Atlantic commerce opened up. In both the Netherlands or Holland and England, they had states that were held in check by parliaments. And so their states were not absolutist, and they could not be predatory where mercantile enterprises were concerned. And so the states were able to promote the interests of the merchants, especially as Atlantic trade opened up, but also benefit from the prosperity of the merchants through taxes, but done in ways that both strengthened the state and strengthened economic enterprise, because Parliament made sure the state would not become predatory. And that was one of the key reasons that Holland and England separated themselves and went up. So the state is important in its response to pandemic and in its response to how we grow after pandemic. And then the third and the final point is the importance of integrated trade. Not only did the state stand behind England and Holland as it went into the Atlantic trade, this is the era that they would do interesting things like chartered companies and things like that. Find ways in which trade overseas was connected back to industries back at home. So the integration of trade. And I mention this because I look at the way we scrambled over PPEs, over ventilators, how there's a sense in which across the world, I believe that post-COVID, this outsourcing of production that put many countries, including the US, that didn't have PPEs and the rest, will lead to some moderation of the hyper-globalization that we've seen in the past. And that we'll see countries begin to sort of place some priority and emphasis on producing or manufacturing internally because of national sovereignty and concerns to do with autonomy. And it raises important questions for us in Africa. As we are now beginning our Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement. And I think that this is an opportunity to think smart, to think about integrated markets and the role they have played historically, but also to encourage states to position themselves in ways that they can facilitate these opportunities. Because throughout all these lessons, especially in terms of the interface of pandemics or epidemics and economies, the state is central, whether we like the state or not. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. There's now time, let's say 5 to 10 minutes so for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, then you're more than welcome. I'll walk across and then hold the mic. Emmanuel, I'll start with the first question then, just to get us started. So you referred to these historical episodes and the role of the state, but of course weak states are common. I mean, I guess the example of Ebola is really the example almost of a weak state. So, which comes first? Is it the fact that there's a crisis and then from that a state emerges, the capacity to kind of govern emerges, or is it that you require a state to be able to control something like a pandemic? So, I'm thinking back to the Ebola crisis specifically, and what could have happened better? What could have been done differently?
I think in terms of timing, the timing could not have been worse. In terms of the specific history of that region, you remember even. I think there was a case in Guinea where healthcare workers went to a village and people freaked out and killed the healthcare workers. But when you're talking about areas where there's deep distrust of states because of the history of the state, what some have called structural violence has been endemic in this region. So it made them very peculiar states. But I'm also reminded of something my late colleague Callistus Juma had pointed out. And there's a sense in which he had observed, and he was in the Kennedy School of Government, some kind of optimism looking at Africa, at how regional bodies and the need for regional trade and things was lifting up governance and institutions of governance. So perhaps this thing where there's a focus on national sovereignty, as if the state has to figure out its politics by itself and has to figure out its economy by itself, I think we need to get beyond that. In 1960, when all of French West Africa became independent, the 8 countries had a population of 12 million people. That is why someone like Senghor kept insisting we should continue with this federation. We cannot be disconnected from France. They needed France's deep pockets to make sure that the standard of living was decent in these new places. And so there is a sense in which our regional bodies, whether it's SADC, whether it's ECOWAS, whether it's that, and their focus on economics. Because as we begin to look at the capacity to trade across borders, it also means an alignment in terms of policies, in terms of laws. And I'm thinking that that would be one of the ways. That's why I ended up on the African free trade. That the rising tide will lift everybody up little by little. You can begin to see the impact in terms of good governance and this and that. Because we cannot just leave it to a place like Liberia or Sierra Leone to kind of pull itself up by its bootstraps and then come and let us play. So that is how I would respond. And I think Africa as a continent, from the AU to our regional bodies, we must be more proactive. It's almost like some of these things are commonsensical. We don't need outsiders to come and tell us that we should do this. But now we've sort of developed a welfare mentality. For everything we do, we want Western donors to come and help. So some of these things we can do on our own.
Let's see if there's one more question from the audience. If I'll ask then the last question. Well, Rachel, there's I'll handle it to follow the protocol.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I want to pick up on your African Continental Free Trade Agreement point. Even before the COVID, actually quite a few years before COVID, the traditional sense of globalization in merchandise trade had started to decline, and services trade had accelerated. So together with that, a more deeper regional supply chain development. And I'm thinking therein lies opportunities for Africa that we could go the services route, as you've referred to, Roderick, and then get bigger markets because of regional integration. I would like to hear your view on that, please. Thank you.
Okay, so let me share some thoughts. I for the last few years, I've had the good opportunity to hang out often with people at the African Export-Import Bank, so I get to see their statistics and they explain things. So I once asked Benedict Orama, who's the president of the bank, what is the most important obstacle to intra-Africa trade? And I thought you would say maybe a common currency or this. Do you know what he said? Lack of information. And gave me several specific examples about why people in Kenya should not be importing leather from Italy to do shoes, because actually Burundi makes good leather. But nobody seems to know that. And that for him it was not coming up with a common currency. So the bank came up with a system, a payments system called Mansa, which they named after Mansa Musa. And it was to allow countries and companies and traders in countries, as they trade across borders, to pay in their own national currency. But the recipient will receive the money in their currency, to find ways to work around this. For me, I think intra-Africa trade is significant. Let me give even just some statistics from 2011. When you look at EU, around 2011, 2012, EU trade just within the EU accounted for about 71% of what they did. So in a sense, European Union trades with European Union. Asia, 53%. The Asians are trading amongst themselves. North America, 48%. Africa was about 13%. We had managed to get it to 15%, and then COVID came. So there is a sense in which we understand the prospects of intracontinental trade, but we haven't been able to leverage that yet. I hope the largest nation or the largest country was one of the last ones to sign on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is Nigeria, because they had all kinds of issues. So I'm hoping that now one of their own is that WTO should be able to talk good sense to fellow Nigerians about the importance of things like that. So the potential is evident. It is clear. There's enough evidence from research that shows this is the way to go. I think all the winners will be most of all of this. It's not like one country would lose one country. And so it's just now to show the commitment to do that. We've been talking about integration since the times of Nkrumah. we just never seem to put our weight behind it.
Thank you very much, Professor Champong. From me also, just to say it was a really fantastic and fascinating lecture. We are very happy that you joined us, and as Ingrid remarked, finally, after many rearrangements. Also thanks to the audience for being here, thanks to those listening online, and we hope you travel back safely, you enjoyed your visit here and you travel back safely. Thank you.